The November wind blew fallen leaves through the streets of Cherokee Park, a respectable suburb of Lexington, where every house looked like it had stepped off the cover of a country magazine. The Holloway family's two-story brick mansion didn't stand out from the neighbors' houses, except for the neatly trimmed juniper bushes along the driveway and the children's bicycles carelessly abandoned on the lawn. Meredith Holloway, a slender brown-haired woman with lively brown eyes, was setting plates on the dining room table for the traditional Sunday dinner. Her husband, Prescott, or simply Press, as he was known to friends and colleagues in the Lexington Police Department, was fiddling with a lawnmower in the garage. 7-year-old twins, Ethan and Aiden, blonde and blue-eyed, scurried around the yard playing detective, a favorite pastime since their father had shown them his police badge. "Boys, wash your hands and get to the table!" Meredith's voice boomed across the yard. At that moment, a black Lexus showed up in the driveway, the car of Garrett Duvall, their longtime family friend and the twins' godfather. "Uncle Garrett!" the boys shouted in one voice, rushing toward the tall man getting out of the car. His dark hair was lightly touched with gray at the temples, and an unfailing kindness shone in his eyes, the color of the summer sky. In his hands, he held a box of cake from the twins' favorite candy store. Prescott came out of the garage, wiping his hands with a rag. He waved hello to a friend he'd known since his college days at the University of Kentucky. It had been Garrett who had introduced him to Meredith at one of the university parties 12 years ago. At dinner, Garrett had entertained everyone with stories from his surgical practice, as always, carefully avoiding the scary details. The boys looked up to him with adoration. Uncle Garrett was their hero as much as their father. Meredith smiled as she served her guest her favorite roast, and Prescott watched this idyllic scene, feeling a slight, inexplicable uneasiness. Something in the way Garrett glanced furtively at Meredith, the way she looked away too hastily when their eyes happened to meet, scratched the detective's professional instincts. But Press habitually brushed these thoughts aside. Just a professional deformity. Nothing more. After dinner, when the twins ran off to their room to play with a new constructor given by their godfather, the adults settled down in the living room. The conversation flowed smoothly between discussing the latest town news and plans for the upcoming Christmas. Garrett, as usual, insisted on spending the holidays together. "You know it's not a holiday without you," Meredith said, and something in her voice made Prescott wary again, but the moment passed, dissolving into the cozy atmosphere of Sunday evening. When Garrett left and the children were put to bed, Prescott stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the dark street. Meredith came up behind him, put her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Oh, nothing. About how lucky we are. A beautiful home, great kids, loyal friends." "We're really lucky," Meredith whispered, and Prescott heard a strange note of sadness or guilt in her voice. But he decided he was just imagining it. After all, he had a perfect life, didn't he? Prescott sat at his desk in the homicide section of the Lexington Police Department, poring over photos from the latest crime scene. His attention was caught by an old framed photo standing next to the Monitor A shot from 15 years ago of him and Garrett, young and carefree, posing in varsity jerseys after a winning game. The memory took him back to the fall of 2009, when they first met on the campus of the University of Kentucky. Prescott, who had just transferred from a community college, was trying to find the right classroom. Garrett, already distinguished by his trim figure and the confident gait of a third-year medical student, helped him get his bearings. By the end of the day, they were already sitting in the student bar, discussing soccer and making plans for the future. Garrett dreamed of becoming a surgeon, following in his father's footsteps. Prescott, on the other hand, was just beginning to realize that police work was his calling. They were an odd pair of friends, a future doctor and a future cop, but it was these differences that made their friendship special. Garrett helped Prescott with the biology required for the forensics course, and Prescott coached his friend in the gym. Their dorm rooms were on the same floor, and evenings often ended with long conversations about life, justice, and the future. Garrett shared stories about his first practices at the hospital, and Prescott talked about his internship with the police. They vowed to always be there for each other, to support each other no matter what happened. It was Garrett who'd first noticed Meredith at that art department party. She stood out in the crowd, not with her screaming beauty, but with some inner grace and intelligence shining in her eyes. "Press, this is your chance." Garrett nudged his friend, and he himself came up to introduce himself first, introducing Prescott. At the time, no one could have guessed how this meeting would change their lives. Garrett was best man at their wedding 3 years later. Prescott remembered his friend giving a toast, his eyes glistening with tears of joy. "I knew from the beginning that you were made for each other. Take care of her, Press. She's special." When the twins were born, the question of a godparent was not even discussed. Garrett accepted the role with such joy and responsibility. It was as if the heavens themselves had blessed him with it. He had been there for them from the first days of their lives, helping with sleepless nights, taking them to immunizations, giving them the most elaborate birthday gifts. A phone call snapped Prescott out of his memories. It was Garrett, inviting him to lunch. "Remember our place? That steakhouse near campus? It's been a while since we sat down like old times." The restaurant was still the same wood paneling on the walls, the familiar smell of roasting meat and beer. They ordered their favorite steaks, and Garrett began to talk about the complicated surgery he'd had that morning. "You know, sometimes I wonder how things could have turned out differently," Garrett said suddenly, looking into his glass. "If I had made a different choice." "What choice?" Prescott interjected, but Garrett only shook his head and turned the conversation to the twins' upcoming school play. That evening, while sorting through old scrapbooks, Prescott came across another photograph, Garrett holding the newborn twins in his arms. Something in his gaze, directed at the babies, made Prescott freeze. It wasn't just the joy of a godfather. There was something more in that look, something deeply personal, almost paternal. The thought was so ridiculous that Prescott laughed out loud. Garrett was his best friend, the man he trusted more than anyone in the world after Meredith. The man who had always been there for him in the important moments of their lives. Always there for Meredith when Prescott was working late. Always ready to help. Suddenly, small details began to pop into Prescott's mind that he had previously overlooked or ignored. Long glances, casual touches, broken phrases, and those blue eyes of the twins, so similar to Garrett's. He slammed the album shut, pushing the unwelcome thoughts away. But the worm of doubt had already begun its destructive work, slowly eroding the foundation of his perfect life. Spring cleaning was a long-standing tradition in the Holloway household. On this April weekend, Prescott was sorting through old things in the attic, while Meredith and the children went to visit her mother. Among the dusty boxes of Christmas decorations and old clothes, he came across a small wooden box he'd never seen before. Inside was a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The first letter was dated August of 2016, a few months before the twins were born. The handwriting was Garrett's. "Dear M," it began, and Prescott's hands trembled involuntarily. "I know we agreed never to talk about this, but I can't stop thinking about that night. About us. About what could have been." Prescott sat upright on the dusty floor, continuing to read. The letters piled up into a mosaic of secret meetings, unspoken words, and repressed feelings. Some were unsent, others bore traces of tears on the paper. The last letter was dated the day the twins were born. As I held them in my arms, I realized that I had never experienced anything like this in my life. Forgive me for everything. I'll be there for you, but only as a friend. For Press. For their sake. The next few days turned into torture for Prescott. He began to notice things that had escaped his notice before. How Ethan wrinkles his nose just like Garrett does when he's focused. How Aiden had the same characteristic gesture of rubbing his chin in thoughtfulness. Their smiles, the cut of their eyes, even the way they spoke, all of a sudden, everything was screaming evidence. At Wednesday night's family dinner, Prescott couldn't take his eyes off his plate. Meredith was talking about the new program at the library. The kids were sharing school news, and he was counting heartbeats, trying to keep his composure. "Dad, look what Uncle Garrett got us." Ethan held out the new medical play set. "He said we'll make great doctors." "Of course we will," Prescott muttered, looking at the perfectly arranged instruments in the toy case. "You've got his genes." "What did you say, dear?" Meredith froze with fork in hand. "Nothing. My head hurts." That evening, when the children were already asleep, Prescott stood at their bedroom window, looking at the photographs in the family album. Each picture now revealed something new. Garrett's gaze as he looked at Meredith, the subtle tension in his wife's posture next to the family friend. 1,000 little things adding up to a monstrous picture of betrayal. "You've been kind of weird lately." Meredith came up behind him, putting her hands on his shoulders. Her touch made him barely restrain himself from recoiling. "Just a job. Complicated case," he lied, slamming the album shut. The next day at the station, Prescott requested access to the DNA research database. His hand shook as he typed the request. He knew one keystroke could destroy everything he'd believed in for the past 8 years. But he had to know the truth. The twins' toothbrushes were in his desk drawer. He'd taken them away this morning, telling Meredith it was time to buy new ones. Garrett's DNA sample was in the hospital's database, standard procedure for all medical personnel. All that was left was to press send. His finger hovered over the key. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he still hoped it was all a figment of his fevered imagination, paranoia brought on by the stress of work. That now he would wake up and it would all turn out to be just a nightmare. The ringing of the phone made him flinch. It was Meredith. "Honey, don't forget that Garrett is coming over for dinner tonight. He wants to discuss something important with you." Prescott looked at the computer screen where the cursor was blinking over the send button. "Of course, dear. I haven't forgotten." He pressed the key. Now, all that was left to do was wait. 3 days of waiting for the results of the DNA test turned into an endless nightmare for Prescott. Every sound of incoming mail made him shudder. At work, he mechanically thumbed through documents, not paying attention to their content. At home, he tried to look less at the children, afraid to see more resemblance to the man he considered his best friend. Meredith noticed the change. One evening, when he didn't answer her question for the 3rd time, she put her hand on his shoulder. "What's going on, Press? You haven't been yourself lately." "I'm fine. Just a complicated case." The familiar lie was already flying off his lips automatically. The results came back Thursday morning. Prescott sat in his office as the computer screen flashed a new notification. His hands shook as he opened the file. Dry scientific terms and percentages added up to one indisputable fact. Garrett Duvall was the biological father of both twins with a probability of almost 100%. Nausea rolled up to his throat. Prescott barely made it to the bathroom in time. He vomited bile until there was nothing left but emptiness inside. The mirror reflected someone else's face, pale with inflamed eyes. Returning home earlier than usual, he began a methodical search of the house while the kids were at school and Meredith was at work. In her underwear drawer, he found a cell phone, an older model he hadn't known existed. In the messages were years of correspondence with Garrett. Their last meeting was only a week ago. When Meredith got home, he sat in the darkened living room. The phone lay on the coffee table between them. "Your mother has the kids." His voice sounded hoarse. "I called her, said we needed to talk." Meredith froze in the doorway, looking at the phone. Her face went dead pale. "Press, I can explain." 8 years, Meredith. 8 years you've looked me in the eye and lied to me. You and my best friend, both of you. It only happened once when you were in a course at the FBI Academy. We were drunk. It was a mistake. Don't lie. His shout made her recoil. "I saw the DNA test results. Garrett is their father, and judging by the messages on that phone, your connection never stopped." Meredith sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. "I loved you, Press. I really did. But with Garrett, it was something else. Something I couldn't resist. And me, and the children. Were we just a cover for your relationship?" "No, you don't understand. I wanted to end it all when I found out I was pregnant. But Garrett, he said he couldn't live without being able to see his children. We decided it was best for everyone." Prescott laughed, bitterly, fearfully. "Better for everyone? You ruined my life, stole 8 years from me, forced me to love children who... They love you, Press. You're the only father to them." "And Garrett? Just a loving godfather? Who has watched me raise his children all these years?" In the silence that ensued, the ticking of a clock could be heard, methodical, merciless, counting down the seconds of a ruined life. "He's coming tonight," Meredith finally said. "The three of us need to talk." Prescott stood up, feeling everything icy inside. "Yes," he said quietly. "We really need to talk." Going up to the bedroom, he opened the safe and pulled out his service weapon. Methodically, he checked the magazine, twitched the bolt. 8 years of lies demanded an answer. The front door slammed downstairs. Garrett came in. The bodies were discovered at dawn. Patrol Officer Mike Donovan was making his usual rounds of the neighborhood when he noticed the front door of the Holloway house ajar. Knowing a fellow detective lived there, he decided to check it out, just in case. The first thing he saw when he entered the house was an overturned floor lamp and the shards of a vase on the living room floor. The second thing was the blood. It was everywhere, on the cream-colored wallpaper, on the white carpet, on the polished surface of the coffee table. Garrett Duvall lay at the foot of the stairs, arms outstretched as if trying to embrace the void. 3 bullet holes formed an almost perfect triangle on his chest. His eyes were wide open, a look of surprise in them, as if death had caught up with him suddenly, giving him no time to realize what was happening. Meredith was found in the kitchen. 1 bullet through the heart. She was face down, her dark hair strewn across the tile floor, soaking up the blood. Her cell phone was lying on the floor with its screen shattered. By 6 in the morning, the house was swarming with police and forensics. Detective Rowena Blackwood, a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair, surveyed the crime scene with the methodicality of a seasoned investigator. 20 years in homicide had taught her to notice details that others missed. "What do we have?" she asked the medical examiner, squatting down next to Garrett's body. "Time of death is between 10 and 11 p.m. 3 shots fired at close range, .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. Looks like a service weapon." Blackwood nodded, making notes in her notebook. "And the woman?" "Single shot, same caliber, killed around the same time." "There's hardly any signs of a struggle," one of the CSIs noted. "They knew the killer. Let him into the house voluntarily. Or he was already here," Blackwood muttered, looking at the family photos on the wall. Happy faces, husband, wife, 2 children, and... "Who's the man in the photos?" "Garrett Duvall, sir. Victim, surgeon at Central Hospital, close friend of the family." "Where are the children now? And the husband?" "The kids are at their grandmother's, and Detective Holloway. They can't find him yet, not answering his cell phone." Blackwood walked slowly around the living room. On the table are 3 cups of unfinished coffee. 1 lipstick on the rim Meredith's, so the 3 of them were sitting here, talking. She noticed a small wooden box in the corner of the room, its contents scattered on the floor. Letters, photographs, some documents. 1 sheet caught her eye, the results of a DNA test. "Check the security cameras in the neighborhood," she ordered, "and find me everything you can about the relationship of these 3, every detail, every little thing." She took another look around the crime scene. Something was wrong here. Something wrong, breaking out of the pattern of a domestic murder. On the wall in the hallway hung a photograph of the twins. Blackwood took a long look at the children's faces, then shifted her gaze to Garrett Duvall's body. "Holy shit," she said quietly, pulling out her cell phone. "Put an APB out on Prescott Holloway, armed and dangerous, and find me his personnel file. Need to know where he might be hiding." The rising sun tinted the windows of the house blood red. A new day was beginning, and somewhere out there in the city lurked a man whose life had crumbled overnight. A man with a service weapon and the experience of a policeman. A man with nothing to lose. Detective Blackwood sat in her office, looking at the evidence board. Crime scene photos, ballistics results, witness statements. It all added up to a picture that made even a seasoned investigator uneasy. "Neighbors didn't hear anything," young Detective Ramirez reported. "They say there's never been a scandal in the Holloway house. A perfect family." "Perfect," Blackwood hummed, looking at the phone records. "So perfect that the wife slept with her husband's best friend for 8 years." On the table were letters from the box, the story of a secret affair written in the participants' own handwriting. Love messages were interspersed with DNA test results and printouts of bank transfers. Duvall regularly wired money into Meredith Holloway's account, the financial analyst reported. Small amounts, once a month, probably for the kids. Which, as it turned out, were his. Blackwood rubbed her temples. Have you interviewed the hospital staff? Yes. The nurses say Dr. Duval often dined with Mrs. Holloway. No one made a big deal of it. Everyone knew they were old friends. Ballistics confirmed the shot was fired from Prescott's service weapon. The order of shots was reconstructed from the blood spatter. First Garrett. 3 bullets. Almost a professional job. Then Meredith. 1 shot to the heart, as if the killer was in a hurry to finish. What about the kids? Blackwood asked. Still at their grandmother's. She's in shock, says Prescott called tonight. Asked me to pick up the boys. Said he and Meredith had a serious talk. A technician entered the office with a laptop computer. You need to see this. A camera at the intersection caught Holloway's car at 1 o'clock in the morning. He was heading toward the river. A gray sedan flashed on the screen, a familiar silhouette behind the wheel. Blackwood squinted. Check all the cameras along the route and organize a search along the river. By evening, the crime pattern was almost clear. Prescott had discovered the truth about the kids, confronted his wife and friend. The conversation had turned confrontational. Perhaps Garrett was trying to explain everything. Hence the 3 bullets to the chest, a sign of extreme rage. Meredith could have tried to intervene. Got 1 bullet. Quick death. Classic love triangle, Ramirez observed. Deceived husband avenges betrayal. No, Blackwood shook her head. There's something else here. Look at the crime scene photos, at the arrangement of the bodies, at the order of the shots. She walked over to the board, taking in the details. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of rage. He planned the whole thing, sent the kids to their grandmothers, waited for them to get together, methodically carried out what he thought was justice. You think he'll kill himself? No, Blackwood shook her head. He's a cop. He knows what it would mean for his kids to be orphaned, with the stigma of a suicidal killer on their father. He's hiding somewhere, and he has a plan. At that moment, a young officer ran into the office. Detective! A call came into the console. Prescott Holloway has been seen near an abandoned hunting cabin in the mountains, 15 miles from here. Blackwood grabbed her jacket. Get an extraction team up here and get a negotiator. We're going to need him. Already in the car, she went over the crime scene photos one more time. Something was bugging her. Some detail she'd been missing. Something important. Her phone vibrated. A message from forensics. Blackwood opened it and froze. Turn the car around, she commanded the driver sharply. It's a trap. He's not in the mountains. The Martha's Cafe was nearly empty, the usual condition for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Detective Blackwood sat at a far table, talking to an older woman in a strict gray suit. I was their family therapist. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw spoke softly, pausing often, choosing her words. Meredith started seeing me about a year ago, said she was tormented by guilt. Did you know about her relationship with Duval? Not right away. She told me in installments, gradually. Their affair started in college before she met Prescott. Garrett was her first love, but he was obsessed with his career, not ready for a serious relationship. When Prescott came along, reliable, loving, Meredith decided this was her chance for a normal life. Blackwood was making notes in her notebook, but she didn't cut off communication with Duval. No, he was Prescott's best friend, was often at their house. And then, it happened during Prescott's business trip. Meredith was depressed. Garrett came over to support her. One night, that changed everything. That's when Blackwood's cell phone rang. Forensics found a hidden microphone at the crime scene. Someone was recording the last conversation. Excuse me. Blackwood returned to the conversation. What happened next? When Meredith found out she was pregnant, she was in a panic, wanted an abortion, but Garrett begged her to keep the babies, promised her that no one would ever find out, that he'd be there to help, but in secret. And Prescott didn't suspect a thing? He trusted them both too much, and they really loved him, each in their own way. Meredith said she was torn between a sense of duty to her husband and an uncontrollable passion for Garrett. After talking to a therapist, Blackwood went to the hospital where Duval worked. In his office, they found a safe. Inside were photos of the twins from the birth center, their drawings, postcards, the real father's secret archive. He watched their every move, Ramirez remarked, looking at the finds. Collected everything like treasure. Because he couldn't openly be their father, Blackwood picked up one of the photos. It showed Garrett holding the newborn twins, his eyes glowing with happiness. Imagine what it would be like to see your children grow up calling another man daddy. That evening, the results of the recording device analysis came back. It had been turned on that fateful evening, but the recording was corrupted. The technicians were only able to recover fragments. How could you... My best friend. I love them more than life. I'm sorry, Press, we didn't mean to... The sound of gunfire, silence. Boss, Ramirez peered into the office. Holloway's neighbor remembered something important. Says she saw Prescott burning some papers in the yard a week before the murder. He was preparing, Blackwood nodded. Destroying evidence in advance. That's not a crime of passion, he planned the whole thing. But then why did he leave the recording device behind? And where did it go? Blackwood walked over to the city map hanging on the wall. He wants us to know the truth, the whole truth. But first... She was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. She listened in silence, then slowly hung up. What? Ramirez asked. Checked Holloway's bank accounts. He made a large cash withdrawal the day before the murder. Also, he booked 3 plane tickets. 3? Yes, for himself and the twins. The flight is in a week, to South America. Blackwood looked at the pictures of the murdered men, then at the happy faces of the twins. He's not just a killer looking for revenge. He's a father trying to protect his children, and that makes him even more dangerous. Detective Blackwood spent the entire night in her office. Photos, reports, evidence, everything was spread out on the floor in chronological order. She tried to see the full picture, to understand the logic of a man whose life had been shattered overnight. Here's where the puzzle begins, she muttered, looking at an old photograph found in the Holloway house. It showed a very young Prescott, Meredith, and Garrett, graduating from the university, smiling faces, no sign of future tragedy. A call from CSU interrupted her musings. When they re-examined the house, they found a hiding place in Prescott's office. Inside was a diary. I'll bring it over right away, the tech said. The diary turned out to be a simple leather-bound notebook. The entries began a month before the murder. Noticed Ethan smiling today, just like Garrett. Same smirk, same squint. How could I have been so blind? Spent 3 hours comparing old photos. Eye color, chin shape, even the gestures. All his. I wonder if they've been laughing at me all these years. Meredith said she was lingering in the library. Checked, she wasn't there. Garrett called, said he was operating late. Lies, lies, all lies. The last entry was dated the day of the murder. It ends today. I have to protect my boys. They must never know the truth. Not now. Not when they grow up. Let them think their father died in the line of duty. It's better than knowing he's a murderer. Oh my God, Blackwood whispered. He wasn't just planning a murder, he was planning a disappearance. At that moment, Ramirez ran into the office. Boss, we found his car, abandoned outside an old warehouse in the industrial district. Inside the car, they found a map with marked points, a flash drive, and an envelope with a letter. Blackwood put on gloves and carefully pulled out the sheet. Detective Blackwood, I know you're on this case. You're a good cop, so you'll understand. I couldn't let them ruin my children's lives. When this story comes out, they'd be outcasts, the son of a murderer or the son of a traitor, which is worse. I chose the third way. Goodbye. They found a full recording of the last conversation on the flash drive. It confirmed everything. The betrayal, the lies, the years of living a double life. But there was something else, some detail Blackwood had no way of grasping. She turned back to the map from the car. The dots were adding up to a route leading to the old hunting lodge. Too obvious for a seasoned detective. Check all the evidence lockers for the last month, she ordered abruptly, especially those where Holloway had access. An hour later, the answer came back. A bag of drugs from a recent raid was missing from the vault, and the corpse of an unidentified vagrant had disappeared from the morgue. This is it. Blackwood glanced at the calendar. He's going to fake his death. He'll plant the corpse in a hunting lodge, set a fire, drugs to burn the body beyond recognition. But why go to all that trouble? So his children can live a normal life, without the shadow of a murderous father, without the knowledge of their mother's betrayal, just a hero cop who died in the line of duty. She grabbed her jacket. "Get the helicopter up. We have 6 hours until dawn. He'll do it at dawn, as a symbol." Dawn was already dawning in the sky as the police cars raced toward the hunting lodge. Blackwood knew it was a race against time, and with a man who had thought through every step of his latest case. As they approached the hunting lodge, they saw the first flames. The fire had already engulfed the roof when the raiding party surrounded the building. "Prescott!" Blackwood's voice boomed in the pre-dawn silence. "We know you're in there! Come out!" The crackle of burning wood was the only response. The firemen were unfurling hoses, but Blackwood gestured for them to stop. She knew. There was no one inside anymore. "Boss!" Ramirez called out to her. "Tire tracks on the dirt road, heading east!" Blackwood grabbed the radio. "All units! Silver Ford Explorer traveling east of the hunting lodge. Driver is armed." The helicopter was already circling above the forest, its searchlight picking out the winding road from the darkness. And there, at the bend, was the glint of metal. "I see a car," came over the earpiece, "approaching the old sawmill." As the police cars pulled up to the sawmill, Prescott Holloway stood on the edge of the platform, a gun in one hand, a file folder in the other. "Stay back." His voice sounded calm. "I have the whole truth here, about them, about me, about the kids. If anything happens to me, it'll be in the press." Blackwood stepped forward. "Prescott, think of the boys. They've already lost their mother. Do you want them to lose their father as well?" "I'm not their father." He grinned bitterly. "Never have been." "Not true. Fatherhood isn't just about DNA. You raised them, loved them, protected them, and continued to protect them." He lifted the folder higher. "You know what's in here? Evidence that Garrett and Meredith planned to take the kids, to take them away. They had tickets, new IDs. They wanted to ruin everything." Blackwood slowly approached. "Is that why you killed them? To protect the children?" "I did what I had to do, what any father would have done." "And now? What's your plan? Fake your own death? Disappear? Do you think that will protect the boys?" For a moment he hesitated. Blackwood saw in his eyes what she was looking for, a glimmer of doubt. "They'll be searching for the truth, Prescott. All their lives they will question it. It will break them harder than any truth." The first rays of sunlight illuminated his face, gaunt, aged 10 years over the days. "I just wanted to..." His voice trembled. "I loved them, all of them." The gun slipped from his hand. Blackwood quickly traveled the distance separating them, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know, Prescott, I know." The handcuffs clicked on. He did not resist, only asked quietly, "Take care of the boys. They can't know until they're ready." As he was being led away to the police car, Blackwood opened the folder. Inside was indeed evidence. Tickets, documents, correspondence. Garrett and Meredith's plan to uncover the truth and start a new life. "Sometimes love kills," she murmured, looking up at the rising sun. "And sometimes it makes you kill." The courtroom was packed as the judge read the verdict. Prescott Holloway stood straight, looking somewhere over the heads of the jury. Double murder in the first degree. Life in prison without parole. "Defendant, do you wish to say anything before the verdict is read?" "Only that I love my children. Everything I did for them." Detective Blackwood watched the proceedings from the back row. Since the arrest, she had often thought about the story, how love and betrayal had been woven into a knot so tight it could only be cut at the cost of her life. The twins were raised by Meredith's sister, Catherine Bright. She moved with them to Ohio, away from the whispers and slanted glances. New school, new friends, new life. The official story for the kids: their parents died in a robbery. A year after the verdict, Blackwood received a letter from Ethan and Aiden. Children's handwriting, touching drawings. "Thank you for catching the bad man who killed our mom and dad. When we grow up, we'll be detectives too." She stared at that letter for a long time, before tucking it away in her desk drawer. Sooner or later, they would find out the truth. It always found its way out. But right now, perhaps the lie was the only thing protecting their childish souls from the cruel reality. Prescott Holloway was serving a sentence in the Kentucky State Penitentiary. He never asked to see his children, never wrote letters. only once passed an envelope through his lawyer, to open when they turned 18. Detective Blackwood sometimes drove by the Holloway house. The new owners had repainted the walls, changed the fence, planted other flowers. But she still thought she saw ghosts, a happy family, boys playing on the lawn, a smiling Meredith, a proud father. 10 years later, on her last day of work before retirement, Blackwood received another letter from Prescott Holloway. "Detective, I know you've always wanted to understand. Why? Why I didn't just divorce? Why I didn't sue for custody? Why I chose violence? The answer is simple. I couldn't let my boys know their lives were built on lies. I'd rather they remember me as a hero who died in the line of duty than a killer of their real parents. This is my last gift to them, a memory untainted by the truth." Blackwood folded the letter and looked out the window. Somewhere out there, in another town, two young men were living their lives, unaware of the gravity of the secret the adults kept. Perhaps it was true justice to preserve their innocence at the cost of someone else's guilt. The last ray of the setting sun painted the walls of the precinct red, reminding of the bloody denouement that forever changed the lives of everyone involved in this story. A story of love, betrayal, and revenge had come to an end. But its echoes will echo for a long time, in nightmares, memories, and unspoken words.